Hello, my name is Richard Keldoulis. I am part owner of Club Church, which is a gay fetish club in the Kerkstraat in Amsterdam, and Sauna NZ, which is the only remaining gay sauna in the city. I'm also probably better known as Jennifer Hopelezz, the drag queen activist and mother of the House of Hopelezz with more than 50 drag children. Today I'm going to give you my tour of the Amsterdam Museum, and I'd like to focus on three areas of interest for me. The first is cruising and gay sexuality. The second area that interests me a lot is immigration, in particular LGBT immigrants to the city. And the third area I want to talk about is gay bars and cafes and the gay nightlife scene. So come and follow me and I'll take you inside. We're standing here in front of a model of the palace on Dam Square, and it was actually originally built as the City Hall before it became the palace that it is today. And it is significant to the queer community for two reasons that I'd like to talk about. In the 1700s, apparently it was a very popular cruising space for gay men. Cruising places have always been important to the gay community, and even today. And a lot of people think, why do we gay men still need to go cruising? Now we've reached full emancipation and we can get married, and what's the point? And actually it's bad for the image of gay people that you're still out in public places cruising. But I think that they still have a very important function. First of all, there are many people who are still not out of the closet, or bisexual people, or people who can't meet people at home. And for many reasons, I think then these places are important, and also just for the fun. A lot of people are exhibitionists and like to have sex in public places. And I always find it kind of interesting that we, for example, find it totally normal that we set aside large parts of parks for people to take their dogs out without leashes, and the dogs can go to the toilet all over the park, and we find that totally okay. But we have a real problem setting aside discrete small areas of parks or beaches for people to have sex. So I think a lot of that's got to do with moralism, and I think it's important that we realize that, and I think it's important that for me, I think it's important that we keep these places open for people to have sex. Today we've got in Amsterdam probably the most famous cruising places in the Vondelpark and the Nieuwe Meer, but in a lot of parks like Ooster Park or Safari Park, there's also cruising places. So the second reason I wanted to talk about the palace here on Dam Square is in the 1730s, it was a place where gay men were executed during a moral panic about homosexuality. The reason I want to talk about that is it's interesting to see how views of homosexuality have changed over the times. So in the 1700s was a very repressive time. In the 1800s, Napoleon laws were introduced in the Netherlands, and homosexuality was decriminalized in 1811. So that was a period of relative liberalism. And then exactly 100 years later, in 1911, new laws came in again repressing homosexuality. And the most infamous law was 248 bis, which raised the age of consent for gay men. And that law wasn't scrapped until the 1970s. So it's interesting to see our ideas on homosexuality through the ages. It's not, in my view, something that we're getting more and more open-minded and liberal as times go on, but it varies during the times. And even in the last 30 years that I've been living in Amsterdam, I've seen our views on sex getting more repressive again. And if you look at, for example, the age of consent or new laws and restrictions in terms of prostitution, you can see that we're getting more morally conservative. Even though people's attitudes towards LGBT people are getting more liberal, our views on sex are getting more conservative again. I next want to talk about immigration. I am myself an immigrant to this country. I moved here in 1990, and I'm also the grandson of Greek immigrants who moved to Australia at the beginning of the 1900s. So for me, immigration's always been a very important part of my story. And I moved to this country for the liberal climate of Amsterdam. That's what really attracted me. And it's not that where I came from, Sydney, was particularly conservative. In fact, Sydney's got a very good, lively gay scene. But I really needed to move to a place where I could discover myself and be my own person. And I think that's a story for many people who move countries. I ended up staying here because I met the love of my life, Eilad, who is now my husband. That's the reason why I stayed. But I think I've always had the idea that immigrants bring a lot of good to the country. They always have new ideas, fresh ideas, and I think it enriches the culture. In the queer community in Amsterdam, I think immigrants have had a huge impact. Probably the most famous queer or gay club in the history of Amsterdam was the IT, and that was founded by Manfred Lange, who was an immigrant himself from Austria. Fabiola was the living artwork Fabiola, who livened up the streets of Amsterdam from the 1970s, came from Belgium. Gay News, which is the only remaining printed gay publication, specific gay publication in Holland, was set up by an American, Tony Del Rosa. So I think immigrants have had such a big impact on this city. You could say also probably half the drag scene at the moment in Amsterdam is people who immigrated from other countries. And in the last 15 years or so, there's been a big influx of LGBT asylum seekers in Holland. We accept asylum seekers based on sexuality from many different countries, from Jamaica to Uganda to Lebanon. And I think that they bring a lot of value to the community. And I think they integrate probably more quickly than straight immigrants. They get picked up quicker, they mix quicker through the apps or going out to gay bars and clubs. And I think they integrate much faster. And I see it as a great enrichment of our society. And that brings me actually onto my last point, which is the gay bars and club scene in Amsterdam. So follow me. Come in. It's not my bar, the Club Church, but it is Café Muncher, the famous Muncher from 1927, and was of course set up by the legendary Bert van Beeren. I wanted to show this because to emphasize the importance of bars and cafes and nightclubs for the queer scene. And I think that's always been the case. It was a safe space where queer people can come together and make friendships or create a sense of family. And also it's important for the livelihood of many people, performers and people working in bars and cafes. And of course now with Corona, everything being closed, we really see everything we're really missing now, how important it's all been. The Amsterdam bar and cafe scene was always huge. When 30 years ago we had an enormous amount of places, and probably in that time about half of them have disappeared. And we used to have places like the Warmoestraat, which was specifically for leather and fetish places like the Argos and the Cockring and the Eagle. And then we had areas like the Hafmansteeg and the Amstel, which was more for kind of Dutch music and a bit more camp public. And then the Regulierstraat, which is more kind of international, trendy sort of gays go there. So, but yeah, the bar scene's kind of disappearing quite quickly in Amsterdam. And a lot of people think, claim it's sort of like the end of Amsterdam as a gay capital. A lot of people look back to the 90s, and particularly in 1998 with the Gay Games, as sort of like the high point in the gay scene here. But I don't really think I think that's a bit of an oversimplification. It's true that all these places have disappeared, but I think that's, there's many reasons for that. People, blame internet or gentrification, or the fact that young people are so, we queers are so integrated that young people don't need to go to gay bars anymore. So there's a whole, many different reasons. Also possibly the AIDS epidemic, because a lot of people who would have been entrepreneurs now have died, the older generation. I think it's probably a combination of all that, but I also think even in the straight scene, a lot of cafes and bars are disappearing, and people now would rather go to festivals instead of going to a club, and restaurants and cafes have become more popular than bars. But in the queer scene, that's had a bigger impact because of the importance of these places for queer people. But on the other hand, a lot has changed and a lot of good things have happened. We shouldn't forget that Pride Amsterdam Pride only started in 1996. And we've got festivals like Milkshake, which is only about 5 years old. And that is, I think that pulls like 25,000 people in one weekend, which I think is on par to like the best queer festivals in the world. So people go more likely to parties as well, like Rapido or Spielraum. Those parties are really popular, and people prefer to go into parties instead of like the clubs and the bars. So in one way, it's a real shame to see it all disappear, but on the other hand, it's just sort of the way the nightlife is developing, that people choose other ways of going out. Yeah. So let's now go to the Regentzaal. Follow me. So in this very dignified Regent's room, I want to show you something from my own club. Very dignified book here from Club Church, which was celebrating 10 years of the club, and that was 2 years ago. And we made 10 flyers to represent 10 different parties that we hold in the club. And Church is well known for its theme parties, and that's sort of what makes us unique. We have about 20 different theme parties, and each one sort of appealing to a different kind of fetish or a different kind of audience. And so we decided to make a book based on our flyers of the parties, of the 10 of our most important parties. So, and I think, of course, it's very appropriate here in the dignity of this room to show you some of our flyers. So we have flyers from 10 parties. This, for example, is a locker room, and we set out the flyer like a real flyer for a party. Rodney, our barman, and that's the Voertaal party we hold once every 2 months. Fetish Lounge, party that we hold every Monday. This one you might need to edit for social media. This is for Naked Bar. This is an underwear party, Zonderbroek, that we hold every Friday. And that was actually an idea that we got from traveling around the world. That was a party, actually my husband Aylard had seen in San Francisco back in the early 90s. Drop your pants and dance party, underwear party. Street Art Festival is a festival we organise once a year outside Club Church, and it's actually the only public LGBT festival held outside of Pride. And we specifically make it friendly for families and children, because it's nice to get out of the club and show in the queer culture, which is club culture, which is always behind closed doors, and it's nice to take it out into the streets and be more open about it. But the colours are all pink and blue, and the logo is a puppy, so it's a pink poodle, so it's very family orientated. This is Blue, which we hold every Thursday, and we attract a lot of drag queens, a lot of party people when we have performances there. Once a year we do the oil party, which is a huge amount of work, and we have a pool of warm oil, and it takes about 50 hours to set the club up for that. We carpet the whole place, put in these huge tubs of oil. of pools of oil. And that's a really great, sexy party where people slide around in the oil, and so it's a really fun event. This one is actually a jack-off party, which is interesting. Jack-off parties became popular in the 1980s during the AIDS epidemic, especially at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, which is very similar to Corona. People were not sure how AIDS was passed on. So there actually was having sex, intercourse was discouraged completely. And people were setting up safe sex parties and jack-off parties. And we actually started that a few years ago. It wasn't super popular, so we'd stopped it. But now with Corona, we're contemplating bringing that party back because it's actually Corona safe as well. So yeah, which is really funny. But yeah. And the last flyer is Meat Market, but that one is really adults only. So this one you're gonna have to go to the website, I think, and to check the details of that. But it's funny how you see fetishes changing through the times, and for example now sportswear is really popular, and other fetishes like skins that's sort of disappearing. So you kind of see, yeah, puppy play, for example, now is also really important in the queer community. So it's funny to see, yeah, fetishes come and go. But we at church always, yeah, we're a very broad club, so we also have events for transgenders and women, although we focus mainly on gay men, and we have very sexual energy in the club, so most of our parties are based around a fetish or sex, but not only. And when we hold a dance party like Blue, that sexual energy sort of comes through the whole club and creates a real sense of freedom for people, which I think is really important. And probably the best thing about church is it's sort of like a place without judgment, and where you can express your sexuality and discover what you like. And I always think that's just really positive and really good for people, because when they're all sexually satisfied, people are usually happy, and yeah, I think it's a real healthy and good thing for people. So that's my plea for sexual positivity, and the service is now over. These are the posters from Gay Games, actually. That was a part of the cultural program, so to recognise that. 1998, which was regarded by many people as the high point of the Amsterdam gay times, 1998, and everyone thinks it went downhill from then. Not totally true, of course, but it was a great time, those couple of weeks in 98.